I'm Rebby.
And I'm Chris, and this is RevTalks.
It's episode 2, and this time we're talking about modern deals and what it takes to get them over the finish line.
And this time we actually won't be doing it over a game of checkers. So we decided that it's probably not the best idea considering we were so locked into the conversation.
Yeah, we might be good at objection handling and demos, but checkers while having this conversation, I don't think that's your strong suit, Chris.
Although that might be added into the ever-growing list of job responsibilities for sales engineers. So
Yeah,
stay tuned.
All right, Chris. Well, I want to start with a broad question here. Would you say that a deep understanding of a customer's business as well as a strong personal connection, do you think those two things can sometimes be more influential to closing the deal than simply meeting and validating technical requirements?
Well, this is a fun question, and I'm going to give it everyone's favorite generic answer, which is it depends. When I think about a customer's business, and going back to our previous episode when we were talking about the importance of alignment to a buying committee and the microscope of ROI and all of those things, I think in this environment, probably not. I don't think it's enough for us to have a strong personal connection or for us to have a deep understanding of our client's business. I think that's a necessity for us to be able to get things across the line, right? But in this environment, we have to be able to do more for our customers for them to make a conscious and confident decision in what they're going to be purchasing. Because at the end of the day, if it just took a good connection, then we really wouldn't be that great of a partner, right? We wouldn't be solving their business problems. I can't tell you how many friends I have in the industry who, they're great connections, but I probably wouldn't buy their platform because it doesn't solve an inherent need of my business or my team. So because of that, I think it's always an asset, right? I don't think there's ever a world in which great personal connections aren't great in sales, but I think we have to think more broadly about what we are bringing to the table when we're actually trying to solve problems for our customers.
That makes sense. What do you think it looks like for an account team to satisfy both of those things, right? To build a really strong personal connection, but then to also do an excellent job and just knock it out of the park when it comes to meeting and validating technical requirements as well?
Yeah, I think there's probably 3 major components to that. The first is mirroring the internal purchase committee or buying committee with our internal team, in this case at Salesloft.
Yeah, going back to your point on multi-threading.
Exactly. So for example, it's probably really important for us to make sure that if a VP level or a C-suite is involved in the deal, or at least is part of that project, that we're pulling in our corresponding VP or CRO to that conversation, right? And we should probably be doing that earlier, not later in the deal cycle. A bad habit that I think a lot of sellers have had, and I'm honestly guilty of this, especially earlier in my career, is waiting until we get into the contract negotiation stage. And then I'm like, okay, well now I need to pull in my VP or I need to pull in the CRO.
Yeah, you're never gonna regret early exec alignment.
Exactly, and even if it doesn't feel like it tangibly moves the deal in that moment, that relationship will pay dividends later, especially when you start to get into legal and other contract negotiations. So that's gonna be important, and it also calls back to the importance of doing technical alignment as well. The second piece is, with that strong connection, that only gets us part of the way. So we definitely need to also pull up things like customer success, right? Things like technical discovery and alignment. Things like that are going to be really important, and the more that we can pull that up and present ourselves as a partner, not just a technical solution, that's how that relationship starts to manifest itself across the buying committee, as opposed to, I have a really good relationship with my champion and he told me we're gonna close that deal.
Yeah, no, I think those are all really, really valid points. It really encapsulates, we have to outperform the bar in all 3 of those arenas, right? Really strong understanding of the business, really strong personal connections at every level that makes sense, and then of course meeting and validating the technical requirements. I think each of those 3 things are table stakes to get a substantial deal across the line in today's market.
Yeah, and I'll call back to the customer success piece, right? We've done a ton of work in our business internally to make sure that we're positioned to make our customers successful. And customer success is everybody's job, but I think sales is also everybody's job. And so the way that we can inspire confidence with our customers is in actively involving our post-sale team with the customer, right? And pulling them into those conversations as well.
Yeah, 100%.
A segue from that question that you just asked me is, when we think about the complexities of these deal cycles that we are seeing in the market today, what are the key skill sets of a top performing pre-sales professional in today's market?
The first trait that I think is so key, and I see it in everyone who's a really, really strong pre-sales professional, is ownership. Just ultimate ownership of getting the customer to a point where they want to purchase your software, right? And that means, working with all different kinds of personalities, not letting anything be a blocker internally or externally, never admiring a problem, always bringing a solution to the table, even when you may not have the ideal amount of discovery or preparation or anything of that nature, always having a solution for moving forward in the deal cycle. I think that level of ownership and really believing that you truly are a co-seller and equal partner in the deal cycle is what will result in a really effective proof of concept. It is what will result in a really, really well-built relationship with the technical champion that is going to drive a really, really strong demonstration. So I think if you ultimately have that ownership as the fundamental thesis that you do everything off of, then that's going to drive all of the results that you want in the first place. But secondly, going back to something I think you said earlier in one of our previous conversations, Chris, that stuck with me was, I think you said that a mentor once told you that when you're meeting with a high-level exec or a C-suite exec, anything of that nature, you either want to be teaching them something about their business or about their industry. And in our profession, we're uniquely positioned to have a level of trust and credibility just by the nature of the role that we play in a deal cycle. And so it's important for us to live up to that and live up to that credibility that we automatically get from the seat at the table, and to deliver a really strong perspective to our buyer as to how we can dramatically improve their business, either based on industry trends that we know, or based on use cases within their business that we've uncovered and solutioned around. I think it's really important for that to be the case, and it's impossible for you to do that if you don't know the industry really well, if you don't know the product that you're selling really well, or if you don't know the customer that you're selling to really well. So if you have that, then you live up to the credibility that you establish just by being in the room. And then finally today, we also talked a lot about adoption and ROI in the last episode, and how every software purchase today needs to be justified with value. And so a sales engineer or any pre-sales professional has to be creating the common thread of value, then the use cases and the value it drives as it relates to the product in every piece of work product that they deliver, whether it's a demonstration or a proof of concept or any kind of technical workshop, anything of that nature. The value of the tool must always be front and center. Yeah. So I think if you have those three things, ownership, a really, really strong perspective on the industry and how a product can solve a customer's needs, and then finally that hyper focus on value, those three things are key things that I see in every top performing pre-sales professional across the board.
I think that's a great answer, and I think it cascades across any industry, right?
Yeah.
Like, obviously
Absolutely.
We're in software, but that's a skill set that I would certainly want on my team regardless of where we are at. I think there's one more word that I would add to that mix, which is curiosity. Yeah. So yes, it's important for us to continue to be credible within that conversation. But I've also noticed that it's also easy to try to over-index on that and pretend like you know everything. Yeah. And ironically, that actually is off-putting to most people, right? Yeah. Going back to the relational piece. And so the way that we start to overcome that is by asking questions, asking really deep, open-ended questions that put customers at ease, but also put us in the perspective or the shoes of the customer so that we can better align to value, so that we can better present ourselves as a credible thought leader within the industry. So I totally agree with everything that you just mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. That discovery, that curiosity is essential. It's the building block for everything else that you do in the deal cycle.
For sure. And I love your call out to a focus on ownership. I think both of us would probably put Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink as one of our favorite books we've read. So do not disagree.
I actually have never read the book. I think I've read a summary or synopsis somewhere, but I'm sure if there's someone to write a book on it, a guy like Jocko is probably the guy.
I would have to agree with that.
Good deal. Well, Chris, I know that obviously you work with some of our largest deals and most complex deal structures in our commercial segment. I'm curious, I'd love for you to share a recent example where you had to navigate either a really complex deal structure, buying committee, complex set of technical requirements, and you had to strategically influence each stakeholder in that deal cycle in order to get the deal done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll speak to it from the perspective of being on the account team as opposed to leading the account team in this realm. So this was an existing customer, and you'll probably remember this, Rebby, because it was a deal that you helped me out with too, in which they were one company that was then becoming 5 different companies that was merging under one umbrella.
Gotcha.
Within that, there were 3 companies that were already acquired under that umbrella, and they all used different sales engagement. and the 2 companies that were also joining also use different sales engagement platforms. So it swiftly became a competitive deal. And because of that, that also meant that the buying committee had ballooned to like 20 people because you had all of these executives.
Stakeholders from each business,
Exactly, right? And so what was important about that was really mapping out the account and getting a good understanding of what was important to each business leader that was going to be in that conversation. And oh, by the way, the complexity of that was also emphasized with and underscored by the fact that we had one-hour conversation to prove that we were the vendor that we're going
as you often do in most RFP style evaluations.
Yep. And so as you can imagine, everyone has their voice, their opinion. Everyone's opinion is right, in fact. And so for us, it was really important to understand deeply and leverage the time that we had. We had about a week of prep prior to that kind of oncoming event to make sure that we were understanding everyone within that buying process and understanding what their priorities were so we could create a compelling story at the highest order. So there are a few actionable things that we did, either on my part or on my seller counterpart's part. One was the seller who was leading the account had a very strong relationship with a champion internally. And when I say a champion, I think a lot of people think that an evaluator is a champion, but that's not necessarily the case. Just because they're the one who's leading the project doesn't necessarily mean they're the one who's going to go to bat for you.
Or that they're the one who can and who has the influence to get the deal done when it comes down to it.
Exactly. And those 2 things were very present. So because of that, our champion was able to give us access to the political influencers within that organization whose opinions were very strong and needed to be heard so that we could play that back in our presentation. And also was able to give us access to some of the top performing end users within that evaluation so that we could tell a more compelling story about what the workflow would look like. And that helped me tremendously with the demo. The other thing that we were able to do was get strong technical alignment and start to have those conversations earlier so that we weren't bagged down by that when we got into that 1-hour conversation. We wanted that purely to be focused on business outcomes. And the only way we could do that with confidence is if we truly understood their internal architecture and how our platform would play with theirs. Especially when you're bringing together essentially 5 different CRM instances into one. So that was something that was imperative for us to be able to do so that we could get to a successful conversation. The last thing we did was we were able to up-level a conversation to their long-term business strategy. And so because of our access that we had with our champion, and again, I'm gonna call back to that, we were also able to understand what their president of sales was focused on, what their CRO was focused on, and inevitably what their CEO was focused on. And so we tailored our conversation to the 3 items that they had as OKRs and said, this is how we are going to help you achieve each one of those things. So to summarize all of that, right, we had a great champion who allowed us and gave us access to the buying committee. We were able to pull up technical alignment sooner and faster so that when we did get to that business level conversation, we could focus on outcomes. And then finally, we were able to align to the OKRs that were most important to the business so that everything that we were saying called back to an outcome that was important to the people who would inevitably make that decision.
I love that. I think my biggest takeaway from that especially in an RFP-led evaluation or anything where you know that the buying committee is incredibly complex and there's so many different opinions, is to have that champion on the inside that's feeding you with the information as to what are the priorities that really matter, that are really gonna get the deal done, who are the people that you really need to align with and impress in order to get the transaction. I think that's such a key way that you can differentiate yourself from the competition, especially when you're in a competitive cycle. Love that example. All right, well, thanks so much for tuning into the show today. And in the next episode of RevTalks, we're gonna be talking about something that we dearly love to talk about, and that is the sales engineering profession as a whole. So super excited for that, Chris.
Likewise.